What if I told you that one of the most successful authors in history was once a single mother, broke, depressed, and on the verge of giving up on her dream? Before there was Harry Potter, before the books sold more than 500 million copies, before the movies became a global phenomenon, there was Joanne Rowling, a woman with nothing but a typewriter, a head full of ideas, and a heart full of doubt. In the early 1990s, Rowling's life looked nothing like the magical world she would one day create. She was jobless. Her marriage had collapsed. She was raising her baby daughter alone. Living in a small flat in Edinburgh, she survived on welfare checks and often skipped meals just so her child could eat. At one point, she described herself as being as poor as it's possible to be in Britain without being homeless. But despite the crushing weight of poverty and depression, Rowling had something the world couldn't see: a story burning inside her. A story about a boy who discovers he's a wizard. She wrote whenever she could, scribbling ideas on scraps of paper in cafes while her daughter slept beside her in a stroller. Her manuscript was rejected again and again by publishers. 12 times the answer was no. Most people would have given up, but Rowling didn't. And that's where the magic begins. Not in the pages of Harry Potter, but in the resilience of a woman who refused to let her circumstances define her future. This is the untold story of J.K. Rowling, how she transformed rejection into resilience, despair into determination, and poverty into prosperity. A journey that proves the real magic isn't in wands or spells. It's in the human spirit. So grab a seat, because this story might just change the way you look at failure, success, and the power of never giving up. Imagine sitting in a cold, cramped flat, your baby asleep in a stroller beside you, while you scribble words on scraps of paper. Your fingers are numb, your stomach is empty, and your mind is filled with doubt. That was the reality for Joanne Rowling in the early 1990s. Long before she became known as J.K. Rowling, the world's best-selling author, she was a single mother living on welfare, wondering if life had already passed her by. Rowling was born in 1965 in Yate, England, to a modest working-class family. Her parents weren't wealthy, but they encouraged her love of books. As a little girl, Joanne would often sit in her room, inventing stories, dreaming of magical worlds that didn't exist anywhere but in her imagination. By the time she was a teenager, she knew she wanted to be a writer. But knowing what you want and achieving it are two very different things. Life, as it so often does, had other plans. In her 20s, Rowling faced a series of disappointments. She graduated from the University of Exeter, but instead of finding her dream job, she found herself drifting. She worked as a researcher, a secretary, even a teacher. Writing was always in her heart, but survival always came first. And then came a fateful trip to Portugal. Joanne moved there to teach English, hoping to start fresh. It was in Portugal that she fell in love, married, and gave birth to her daughter, Jessica. But the marriage quickly crumbled. Her husband was abusive, and within a short time, the relationship collapsed. So Joanne did the only thing she could. She fled. With a baby in her arms and almost nothing in her pockets, she returned to the UK. She had no job, no partner, no savings, just a child who depended on her for everything. This was rock bottom. She moved into a small flat in Edinburgh, relying on government assistance to survive. At one point, she admitted that she was as poor as it's possible to be in Britain without being homeless. She battled depression so severe that she later confessed she thought about ending her life. But even in the darkest nights, a spark remained. That spark was a story about a lonely boy with a scar on his forehead, who discovers that he belongs to a magical world. Rowling began writing in cafes around Edinburgh, pushing her daughter's stroller through the rain just to have a warm place to sit. She ordered the cheapest coffee she could afford and stayed for hours, filling notebook after notebook with the adventures of Harry Potter. Sometimes she couldn't even afford heat in her flat, so writing in cafes became not just a passion, but a necessity. Yet, the doubts were relentless. Who would care about her story? Who would publish the work of a struggling single mother with no connections? Each day was a battle between hope and despair, but she kept writing. Rowling's days in Edinburgh followed a relentless rhythm of survival. She would wake up early, bundle her baby in warm clothes, and set out with her stroller to find a cafe where she could sit without being noticed. With every sip of cheap coffee, she tried to drown the voice inside her head that whispered, "You're wasting your time. No one will ever read this." And yet, line by line, page by page, the story grew. She had nothing in her life that resembled stability, no secure home, no partner, no job. But on the pages, she built a world full of magic, friendship, and hope. Harry Potter became more than just a character. He became her escape, her therapy, her way of believing in something beyond her bleak reality. But poverty doesn't let you forget it exists. Bills piled up. Letters demanding payment filled her mailbox. She dreaded the sound of the postman's knock. On some days, she couldn't afford food for herself and went hungry so her daughter could eat. On other days, she wondered if she was a terrible mother for spending hours writing when she could have been looking for work. The weight of depression pressed down heavily. Rowling has spoken openly about those days, admitting that she considered suicide. But what stopped her was one simple thought: her daughter. Jessica needed her. Giving up was not an option. Still, rejection haunted her. When she finally finished the first draft of Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, Rowling typed it up on a manual typewriter, since she couldn't afford a computer. She sent the manuscript to publishers with trembling hands, praying for a miracle. The first letter came back. Rejected. The second. No thank you. The third, the fourth, the fifth. More rejections. Each one a dagger to the heart. 12 publishers in total turned her down. Some claimed children's books weren't profitable. Others dismissed the story as too long, too strange, too unlikely to sell. For a woman already drowning in despair, those letters felt like confirmation of her worst fears, that she was a failure and that her dream was worthless. Imagine that for a moment. You've poured your soul into a story. You've written through hunger, through depression, through loneliness. You've carried your baby through the rain to sit in cafes just to keep writing. And after all that, 12 doors slam in your face. Most people would have stopped, but Joanne didn't. She kept sending her manuscript, kept believing, even if only a small, fragile part of her did. She once said, "I was set free because my greatest fear had already happened. I was poor. I had failed on an epic scale. And yet, I was still alive, still breathing, still writing." And then, one day, a small publisher named Bloomsbury agreed to take a chance. But even then, the editor advised her not to quit her day job, warning that children's books rarely make money. Rowling didn't care. She finally had a yes. That first printing of Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone was only 500 copies, many of which went to libraries. But for Rowling, it was enough. After years of rejection, abuse, poverty, and despair, she had achieved something almost miraculous. Her story was out in the world. And little did she know, it was only the beginning. When Bloomsbury finally decided to publish Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, Joanne had no idea just how much her life was about to change. At first, the signs were small. A few positive reviews trickled in. A librarian recommended the book to children. Parents noticed their kids reading late into the night, unable to put it down. But then something unusual started happening. Children were passing the book to their friends, teachers were reading it in classrooms, and word of mouth spread like wildfire. This wasn't just a book, it was becoming a phenomenon. The first 500 copies sold out quickly, and Bloomsbury printed more. Soon, Scholastic, a major U.S. publisher, bought the American rights for an unheard-of sum at the time: $105,000. For Joanne, who had been surviving on welfare checks, that moment felt surreal. Imagine going from skipping meals to feed your child to suddenly holding a six-figure publishing deal. But Rowling didn't stop writing. She poured herself into the sequels, crafting not just stories but an entire universe. Each book built upon the last, and with every release the fan base grew. By the time Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban hit shelves, the world was hooked. Midnight book launches drew crowds of children and adults alike, dressed as wizards, waiting eagerly to dive back into Hogwarts. Rowling herself became a household name. Interviews, television appearances, awards, all of it felt overwhelming, but at the core, she remained the same woman who once sat in cafes with nothing but a stroller and a dream. Her financial life transformed rapidly. She went from being a single mother on welfare to becoming a millionaire in just a few years. But wealth wasn't the part that mattered most to her. What mattered was stability. She could now provide a safe, comfortable home for her daughter. No more letters demanding payment. No more nights wondering if she had failed as a mother. Yet success came with its own pressures. With each book, expectations grew. Millions of fans wanted the next chapter, the next twist, the next magical adventure. Rowling described the wait as both exhilarating and crushing. Every word she wrote would be dissected by readers around the world. But instead of letting the pressure destroy her, she used it as fuel. Rowling remained disciplined, writing tirelessly, staying true to her vision. She had built a universe too vast to abandon, and she was determined to finish it. By the time Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire launched, the series had become a global cultural event. Translated into dozens of languages, sold in every corner of the world, the books were no longer just children's stories. They were a bridge across generations. Parents, teenagers, and kids all read them together. And then came the movies. Warner Brothers secured the film rights, turning Harry Potter into one of the biggest cinematic franchises in history. The release of the first film in 2001 was a turning point. Suddenly, Hogwarts wasn't just in the imagination. It was on the big screen, larger than life. Millions of people who had never read the books now joined the fandom. Rowling's rise was no longer about survival. It was about legacy. She had gone from a struggling single mother to one of the most influential authors of all time. But behind the glamour and success, Rowling never forgot her past. She often reminded herself and others that her journey wasn't about magic wands or lucky breaks. It was about persistence, resilience, and the refusal to quit, even when the world told her she was worthless. Her message became clear. Failure is not the end. Sometimes it's the beginning. By the mid-2000s, J.K. Rowling was no longer just an author. She was a global phenomenon. The Harry Potter books had sold millions of copies. The movies were breaking box office records, and the franchise had become one of the most valuable in entertainment history. Rowling had achieved what once seemed impossible. She had gone from living on welfare to becoming the world's first billionaire author. But money, as she often reminded people, was never her true motivation. For her, the real reward was something deeper. The millions of lives she had touched with her words. Children who once hated reading were now devouring 700-page books overnight. Adults rediscovered the magic of storytelling. Families bonded over the adventures of Harry, Hermione, and Ron. Around the globe, a new generation of readers grew up believing that courage, friendship, and love could conquer even the darkest of evils. But Rowling's legacy isn't only about Harry Potter. It's also about resilience and the courage to embrace failure. In speeches at universities, she shared openly about her struggles, her depression, and the years when she felt like a failure. Her honesty gave people permission to face their own hardships without shame. And she gave back. Rowling donated hundreds of millions of dollars to charities focused on poverty, children's welfare, and medical research. She created the Volant Charitable Trust to support causes close to her heart and became an outspoken advocate for literacy and equal opportunity. For Rowling, giving was part of her story. She once said, "You will never truly know yourself or the strength of your relationships until both have been tested by adversity." Those words weren't just philosophy, they were her life in action. Even beyond philanthropy, her influence on literature and culture is undeniable. Harry Potter is now taught in schools, studied in universities, and cherished by fans who pass it down to their children. The Wizarding World theme parks, fan conventions, and endless adaptations are proof that the story she began in a small cafe has become a permanent part of global culture. But perhaps her greatest legacy isn't the money, the fame, or even the Wizarding World itself. It's the reminder that dreams can grow from the most broken places. That a single mother with nothing but a pen and a stubborn belief in her story could transform her life, and the lives of millions, forever. Today, J.K. Rowling stands as a symbol of resilience, imagination, and hope. Her story tells us that failure isn't final, poverty isn't permanent, and even in the darkest times, magic can be found if you dare to create it. And that is her true legacy. Not just the books she wrote, but the millions of people she inspired to never give up on their own story. J.K. Rowling's journey reminds us of something powerful. Life will push you to the edge. It will test your patience, your courage, and your faith. But in those darkest hours, you still hold the pen to your own story. Rowling went from rock bottom, poverty, rejection, and despair, to building one of the most beloved universes ever created. She didn't let failure define her. She didn't let rejection silence her. She kept writing, kept believing, and kept fighting for her dream. And that's the truth for all of us. You don't need perfect conditions to chase your vision. You don't need everyone to believe in you. All you need is the determination to keep going when giving up feels easier. Because if J.K. Rowling could go from welfare to wizardry, from rejection letters to world records, so can you. This has been Deep Dollar Stories, where real struggles meet real triumphs. If this story inspired you, make sure to subscribe, leave a like, and share this video with someone who needs a reminder that their story isn't over yet. And remember, sometimes rock bottom isn't the end. It's the foundation where the greatest stories begin.